Hi, this is Alessio. Hope you're well. So Bitcoin has just done two important things. In fact, Bitcoin managed to break this rising uptrend line you're seeing here recently. And more recently, you can see that the death cross signal has just recently triggered as well. The daily 50 simple moving average, the gray line, has gone below the 200 simple moving average here, the green line. So what could this mean? Is this a sign that Bitcoin is moving into a bear market or downtrend? Or are there some better ways to look at this chart picture and examine what is happening here on Bitcoin? So I'm going to dig into this chart. All right, guys, join me. All right, guys, welcome back. So before we dig into this particular chart of Bitcoin, which as you can see here is now broken this downtrend line, and I'm going to examine the important signal that has just triggered here, the death cross signal, which, as I'm sure you know, some analysts consider this to be a bearish sign. But the question is, are they right? We'll examine this in more detail. Before we do that though, let me first of all show you this. What you see here is a screenshot of my video, the members video from the 2nd of November. And in that particular video, I issued a major warning about Bitcoin. Here's some clips and we'll come back. Because of the Dow theory bearish signal, at the moment there is an increasing or elevated risk of more downside potential. So at the moment here, there is potential still for the C wave to extend lower. Recently, my good friend and trader Manuel Bly, the DowTheory.com, he mentioned in his newsletter that Bitcoin had triggered a Dow theory bearish signal. All it meant was that risk to the downside had slightly increased. As long as Bitcoin, as long as price remains below this recent high that it made there, there's still a higher risk or higher probability for a lower low into likely testing this trendline support and potentially even lower levels, this important region of support between 93,700 to even 91K. All right, guys, thank you for watching that video. So as you saw in the clips, when the Dow theory bearish signal occurred, that increased downside risk. In the video, in the members video on the 13th of November, here's a screenshot. I mentioned there's more downside risk potentially to the lower targets. Why? Because Bitcoin had got rejected from its daily 21 EMA. This bounce just got rejected. And I said, as long as Bitcoin stays below resistance, there's potential for more downside risk here towards this 91K, 93K level here. And indeed, Bitcoin has followed through and has dropped to those levels. So what Bitcoin has done now is two important things. Firstly, it has broken this uptrend line you're seeing here. Now, as I'm sure you know, some textbooks in technical analysis say, well, if that occurs, if you see a break of the uptrend line, that potentially means we're in a downtrend. However, as I shall explain to you, that is not necessarily the case. But also importantly, the 50 simple moving average here, the grayish white line, has crossed recently below the 200 simple moving average, which, as I'm sure you know, that's often called a death cross. Typically seen by some analysts or by most analysts as a bearish sign or as a negative sign. But guys, if you've been watching my videos for some time, you probably know my views about the death cross signal. Okay, because it's not the same as everybody else's. And I'll explain to you why. So the question is this: now that Bitcoin has fallen below its uptrend line and we have a death cross signal, are these now potentially very dangerous and bearish signs for Bitcoin in the next several months? I'm going to show you what the true meaning of a death cross signal is. Let's take a look at 2025. This signal occurred back in April, if you remember. So you can see what happened here. The 50 SMA, the 50 simple moving average, went below its 200 simple moving average. And by the way, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you every instance. I'm going to show you every example of a death cross on Bitcoin going back to 2011. So here it is. You can see that when the death cross signal occurred, by that time, the price had become so overstretched, so oversold, that for the next several weeks and months, for the next 1 to 3 months, Bitcoin, as a matter of fact, rallied. So it bottomed soon after the death cross signal occurred. Price bottomed and then rallied for the next several months. Here's an example from 2024, as shown to you by the red arrow. When the death cross signal occurred, by that time it was bottoming. And then for the next 1 to 3 months, yeah, it rallied higher. This is the year 2023. You can see when the death cross signal occurred here, yep, pretty much was bottoming, and then for the next several months, rallied higher. Next example. Again, you can see it clearly very here. Now, in this example, when the death cross signal occurred, there was a bit more downside, but nonetheless, for the next several months, it rallied higher. That was the year 2022, 2021. Again, I know it becomes a bit tedious showing every example, but just bear with me here. So in the year 2021, after the death cross signal occurred, there was a bit more downside here. So price did not immediately bottom, but nevertheless, after that drop, you're seeing here, for the next several months, it rallied higher. By the way, pay also attention to the direction of the 200 simple moving average, the green line. So if this is upward sloping, there's a higher probability of price usually carrying on the uptrend in the next several months. So do pay attention to that. This is the year 2020. Notice that in that year, despite the fact that the death cross signal occurred with a downward sloping 200 moving average, nevertheless, after the death cross signal occurred, here the price rallied for the next several months, the next 1 to 3 months. Okay, and again, it's the next 1 to 3 months that at the moment matters. Let me show you this. 2019. Now, 2019 was an exception to the rule. Notice that when the death cross signal occurred, the price did indeed have a negative reaction and dropped. However, you will notice that by the time the death cross signal occurred, there was already a strong bounce in the price of Bitcoin, which is not the case today. Right now, as I'm making this video, we do not have a strong bounce. In fact, the price is pretty much oversold. 2018, notice, despite the fact that that year it was a bear market for Bitcoin, after the death cross signal occurred, pretty much soon after, in the next several weeks, Bitcoin rallied. 2015, again, after death cross signal, price rallied higher in the next 1 to 3 months. Now, in the year 2014, you will see after the death cross signal occurred, the price of Bitcoin went sideways for a while, but then it did have a negative reaction and then dropped significantly lower. However, you will see that in that year, the slope of the 200 moving average was downwards. So we were already in a bear market at that point when this death cross signal occurred. So that was a bit of a warning sign. This is also in the year 2014. So look at this. This is another example from the same year, 2014. In April of that year, notice after the death cross signal occurred, notice we have an upward sloping 200 moving average. And notice after the death cross signal, despite the fact there was another drop, nevertheless, in the next 1 to 3 months, price rallied, went higher, as you'll see here, is positive. This is in the year 2011. Now, 2011 is also another example of when price did not have a positive reaction. And you will see that after the death cross signal occurred, it continued the downward path. All right, guys, so we have looked at every example of a death cross signal going back to 2011 all the way to the more recent example we saw in the year 2025. And here's what this means. So we're going to apply this to the more recent death cross signal that we have here on Bitcoin in November of 2025. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to actually write this down here. We have 12 examples, 12 instances of a death cross signal, DC. And out of those 12 examples, as we saw, 9 of them were positive, so positive signals, which means in the next 1 to 3 months, price went higher. But there were 3 negative ones as well, where after the death cross signal, price dropped, continued to go lower. So what does this mean? This means we have a 75% probability of the price going higher in the next 1 to 3 months, based on 9 signals out of 25 being positive for the next 1 to 3 months, and only about 25% being negative. So, in other words, we have a much higher probability, 75% probability, of the price of Bitcoin rallying in the next 1 to 3 months, being positive in the next 1 to 3 months, despite whatever might happen in the near term. So for example, don't get me wrong here, guys, I'm not saying the price of Bitcoin has definitely bottomed right now. I'm not saying that because at the moment, as we're making this video, as yet there's no sign of a bottom yet. But given what we're seeing here, based on the probabilities and based on the stats, we have a much higher probability, 75% probability of a death cross signal, as occurred recently, turning out being positive, okay? But indeed, we have a 25% probability of that signal resulting in more downside in the next few months, okay? So I don't know about you, but personally, I'm going to go with what I consider to be the higher probability, which is to see the price of Bitcoin rallying and seeing a strong bounce in the next 1 to 3 months. And by the way, let's not forget, the price of Bitcoin, as we're making this video, is already pretty much oversold. Now, even if it continues to push a bit further lower, which is possible, nevertheless, let's not forget, based on what we saw in this video, every example of a death cross signal, the balance of probabilities seems to show that after a death cross signal occurs, especially after an all-time high, and also the fact that we had a rising 200 moving average here before that death cross signal occurred, again, the balance of probabilities seem to favor that in the next 1 to 3 months, we could see a strong bounce or a rally. Again, guys, I'm saying the next 1 to 3 months. So I don't really care what happens in the next few days. What matters is what happens in the next several weeks, going to the end of the year, again, the next 1 to 3 months, which has a higher probability, a 75% probability of the price rallying and seeing a strong bounce and potentially moving back into an uptrend. That's what I'm going with. Now, I know some of you are probably thinking, well, maybe this time is different. Maybe this time it's going to be the 25% probability where we just drop and crash much further lower. Yes, that is possible, but for me, at the moment, that carries a lower probability. So I'm personally with the green scenario for the next several months. And let me also mention this. I think it's generally a mistake that a lot of analysts make, that they think that just because a trend line gets broken, that by itself means, oh, okay, the trend has reversed and now we're going to fall into a downtrend. No, as I mentioned to you in my previous video, everything depends on the next bounce, okay, the next rally. Let's look at the structure of that next bounce or rally. Is the structure going to be impulsive, where you see a 5-wave rally, like on the lower time frame, on a 60-minute, that would be a positive sign for a bounce. Or, on the other hand, if you get a corrective bounce, which is a 3-wave move or rally, that would be a very dangerous sign for Bitcoin. So let's see what kind of a structure we get in that next bounce or rally in the price of Bitcoin. By the way, guys, for those of you who want to join our membership, let me just say that I'm going to come out with a very special offer to join the membership in the next few weeks. So make sure you watch our videos for more details about that. Anyway, guys, let me know in the comments what you think. I'll be interested to hear your views. And by the way, guys, don't forget that myself and Charlie Burton are doing an online educational course on trading and technical analysis. And to get the early bird discount, just go to this link you see here, which is also in the description. Okay, thank you very much indeed. See you guys in the next video update. Cheers.